Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I am Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am excited for a special program. This ALN Thursday at 3 features a keynote from Phillip A. Washington, CEO of the Denver International Airport. Following his keynote would be a discussion with Bryan Oldham and a larger panel discussion, I think led by Jennifer Mims, but we'll bring Jennifer on in just a moment to talk more about that. As you can see, we have more panelists and they will all be introduced in full. But before we get underway, we just want to thank our ALN Platinum organizational member, Onuma System, as well as our patron members, Definitive Logic, ABS Quality Evaluations, CGI, and Jacobs. And all our organizational members, a big thank you to their continued support so that we can do programs like this. And if you're out there thinking you might like to work with us, we would love to hear from you. So please reach out through our website or in the chat. And we'll talk more about upcoming events later. For now, I'd like to bring on Jennifer Mims, who is Director of Asset Management at Jacobs, and Mike Bornero, who is ALN Executive Director. Hey, Mike. Hey, Jennifer. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Nick. And yes, indeed, this is a very special program. It's the first of the ALN Airports Asset Leadership Board. We thank Jacobs for taking the lead in establishing these boards to get the message of use an asset management governance approach to gain dramatic benefits in your mission outcomes. And Jennifer has worked with airports and is very interested in helping the airport industry advance their asset management capabilities. So thank you, Jennifer, for being a co-chair of the ALN Airports Asset Leadership Board and for helping us assemble this excellent panel today. And special kudos for getting Phil Washington. If you would like to talk a little bit about Phil Washington before he comes on, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. So thanks both Nick and Mike. And yeah, I'm particularly excited about this board that we're launching today. I have been working with airports and really in the asset management space for about 20 years. The last 9 have been in the consulting space with Jacobs. And so I've worked with lots of different airports. And I think it's safe to say 100% of those airports I work with always ask, well, what are other airports doing? What are best practices? How can we learn how to sort of move the dial on our asset management culture that we're creating? So there's lots of forms that get into like the nuts and bolts of asset management, whether it's ISO 55000 or IFMA or the Institute of Asset Management, and they go into like real specifics, but there really isn't a form that has been established previously that focuses on the leadership. And that's what this board is about. And that's what you're going to hear from our panelists. So I do have the honor of introducing Mr. Phil Washington. So Phil, you can cue up your camera and come off mute, but Phil is the CEO of Denver International Airport. He was nominated and unanimously confirmed by the Denver City Council back, I think it was in the summer of 2021. As soon as Phil joined, he was very committed to developing a vision for the airport, which I think he has a couple slides that get into his Vision 100. And part of that vision is supported by pillars. And as you'll see as he goes through that, there's very strong connections back to asset management. And it's been great getting to know the Denver airport and seeing the leadership that Phil has provided because he has set the tone from the top that asset management is important to the services we provide as an airport. So in his role as CEO, Phil is overseeing a $10 billion capital improvement program. They're sort of rebuilding. If anybody's been through Denver lately, it seems like the whole airport's sort of being rebuilt. Definitely the Great Hall there and getting through security. Every time I go through Denver, it's like slightly different. So lots going on there. And something that's really cool, and maybe Phil, you'll talk a little bit more about it, is the Center of Equity and Excellence that's being built again under Phil's leadership. And this is I think it's an actual facility, but more importantly, it's a program to introduce young people to the aviation industry and create opportunities and long-term career paths to bring young youth into the aviation market. So pretty cool and visionary work that Phil is doing there. So without further ado, just really again, Phil, want to thank you for taking time to talk to this group, and I will turn it over to you to provide any more background and talk about Denver International Airport and asset management.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for that kind introduction. It's great to be with you and Mike and the whole asset leadership network. I appreciate the work that you all are doing. Is so needed in not just aviation, but it's needed in infrastructure as a whole. So I'm grateful to be invited to kick this meeting off because I believe that asset management is really a central activity of any successful organization, whether it's Denver Union Station, or I'm sorry, Denver International Airport. I'm thinking about Denver Union Station, or any other of the modes of transportation. I started out my adult life in the United States Army. And I was in the United States Army for a little over 24 years. In any of the services, I think asset management is the key, one of the big keys in military service, because that is a huge piece in terms of keeping equipment, keeping the facilities, all of those things up to par in a military environment. And so that is sort of when I started thinking about asset management, way back when I was in the military. And so I was recruited back to Denver from running transportation in Los Angeles County for a little over 6 years, where we actually included asset management in what's called Measure M, which is an infrastructure measure, a transportation measure that we got passed in 2016. And what we said then was you can't build new capital programs without taking care of it. And we were successful in getting a slice of that massive sales tax measure to be dedicated to asset management throughout the life of that measure, which, by the way, has no sunset. We were bold enough to go out to voters in the largest county in America and say to them that if we build this infrastructure, we have to take care of it. So therefore, this sales tax measure should not end unless voters decide to end it. And people understood that. People understood that, if you build it, you got to take care of it. And one of the examples that I used then was you wouldn't buy a car and never change the oil. This is asset management. And I'm happy to say that it's kind of funny because the measure began to poll, the no sunset measure with asset management embedded in it, began to poll higher than the 40-year measure that was originally thought about. And I don't know what the psychology is around that, other than people thought 40 years was too long, but they thought forever was good to go. So the psychology around that is pretty interesting. So came back to Denver, and as Jennifer mentioned, one of the first thoughts in the vision or Vision 100 that we put forth to prepare this airport for 100 million passengers, one of the key priorities was asset management. It's such a priority that we made it a pillar, one of 4 pillars in that Vision 100. And we call it taking care of what we have. And so it's not, or maintaining what we have, not a real fancy title, but it's a title that makes sense. that we need to maintain what we have. So we have, as you can imagine, lots of facilities. We have over 300.
Mr. Washington, is
Yes.
now a good time to have Bryan share the slides? Because I think you're
Sure.
talking to slides.
Sure.
Bryan,
Sure.
if you're able to share, there we go. Thank you. Sorry to
Yes.
interrupt.
Yes. Not a problem. So this Vision 100 says that we need to prepare this particular airport for 100 million passengers. Denver International Airport was designed for 50 million annual passengers. The end of this year, we will be at 78 million annual passengers. And in the next 3 or 4 years, we will be at 100 million annual passengers. So this slide really lays out that Vision 100 and our asset management strategy to say in Pillar 2, we're going to grow our infrastructure. That means completing major projects on time, on budget. And then, of course, Pillar 3 says that we will not only build new infrastructure, but we will maintain what we have. And that becomes a huge task. We have, as you see on the right side of the slide, we have to maintain so many different assets. These are assets by the numbers. And we are doing this in a very sustainable way and a redundant way. But we made this one of the pillars in our overall plan. It's just that important. We have set the expectations for our staff to begin delivering these various projects and also doing assessments that I'm sure Bryan will talk about during the panel. But it's important to begin to do assessments on the assets that you have so you can understand the condition of your assets. And I'm a big proponent of having a predictive asset management system where we have a good idea of when the asset will break down, and we're not just waiting for the asset to break down. So you can sense my passion around this subject. I could go on and on about asset management that started for me when I was in uniform and making sure, and when I was in garrison and I was not deployed, all we were doing was taking care of our assets. That's all we were really doing when we were on base or in garrison. So thanks again for allowing me to sort of set the tone for the meeting today. As we look around the country in all modes, we see bridges not in good state of good repair. We see highways that never were designed for the volume of vehicles that are traversing them right now. All of these things tie into asset management, along with getting a qualified workforce ready to take care of these assets as well. So I wish you all the best as you explore ways to inject asset management principles into your operations. And I look forward to listening to some of the discussion today as well. But thank you for having me, Jennifer and Mike, and Bryan will represent us well during his panel.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I really appreciate that. Jacobs did have the opportunity a couple years back to do some work with Phil and his executive team. And oftentimes work we do, we get in there and we'll often start with a maturity assessment of the organization, but it gets so pushed down within the organization that it's not the importance of it isn't necessarily embraced by the staff. but in all the work sessions that we did at Denver, Phil was there. He was online, he was responding, and you could just see how that set the tone for the rest of his executive leadership. So he's not just developing this vision and sort of putting it out there. He was actively engaged and letting the leaders know how important this initiative was. So hats off to you, Phil, on kind of that tone that you set. I really admire that. Bryan, I think you have some follow-up for what's going on at Denver.
I do. So let me get this next slide shared and we'll go from there. So again, thank you everybody for your time today, and really excited to be here again with everybody. So let me share this slide. I'm not used to Zoom, so I got to get used to that. All right. So one of the things Phil was talking about, right, is it's very important here from an asset management standpoint. And this is really leading into the panel is asset management, at least here at DEN, touches almost every major business unit out here, whether it's obviously maintenance, but we also work with engineering or design engineering, construction, airline affairs, sustainability, etc., business management ops for contracts, concessions. Concessions here happens to be the group that helps build out concessions out in the terminals. So they're putting in assets. They need to know what's there. They need to know where HVAC ducts are running, where the electrical lines are. Those are all things that we do from an asset management standpoint here at DEN. And it's really vital for asset management to take the lead to these other groups. A lot of these groups don't understand asset management or what we do. And so it's really important that we talk to these groups and that we help educate them on what asset management is, how we help them, but also their role. Everybody you see on this slide, and every airport's going to have a slightly different configuration, but every group on here has a role in asset management, and it's important that they know what their role is and how they impact what they do impacts asset management and impacts the overall operations of Denver International. So it's really important that as asset management people, we take the lead as the leaders and go out and meet with them in their offices, out in the maintenance facilities, out in the concessions areas, out in the parking garages, and make sure that they understand what they do impacts everything else that goes on in the operation, but how we can also provide them a great service and help them understand what they need to start replacing and how soon they need to replace it, so they can build up their business plan as well to look out 5 and 10 years in the future and understand where they will need to help, and we can help provide them that. So it's really educating them and helping them learn so they become good leaders for us as well from an asset management standpoint. So that's really what I just wanted to briefly talk about before we hit the panel.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Bryan, for adding that. That's a cool slide. I might plagiarize it. It's like putting Jacob's brand on it. No, but that's a really cool slide. I like how you've broken out all the customers. And Denver is, I will point out, and Phil touched upon this as well, on how they have a very robust condition assessment program. So they're one of the airports that I'm aware of that it's like this continual condition assessment program, almost like the Golden Gate Bridge, right? Like they paint the bridge and by the time they get to the end, they start painting back again. So it's like this continual process. They do have that going at Denver, and it feeds into their Maximo system. So they have really robust data and starting to connect all these pieces, whether it's from the condition assessments, Maximo, which is the system they use. Somebody mentioned levels of service and how important that is to an asset management program. And they're really starting to layer in all these different components. So I'm really excited to continue to watch the journey at Denver International.
So I would also like to thank Bryan for being a co-chair of the ALN Airport Asset Leadership Board. And it was his comment that he is talking to 14 different entities at the airport that inspired the topic of this about being basically a leader among leaders, because each one of those departments has a very strong leader. And as an asset manager, you've got to come in and help all the leaders understand that they're still in charge of their section, but have the service of asset management available to them.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's excellent. A leader among leaders, Bryan. That's what you are. I love it. And I see there's some questions in the chat. I think so. Mike, we'll keep going though, and then come back to the questions after
Yeah,
they
because
go.
they pertain to all of the airports, not just Denver. So
Perfect, perfect. Why don't we transition, Rick Connolly, if you can pop up. I was just kind of going with the Maximo theme. They also use Maximo at LAWA, Los Angeles World Airport. So Rick Connolly's joining us. He's the Deputy Executive Director at Los Angeles World Airports, which is LAX and Van Nuys. I think he's been there for a very, very long time. So he has a lot of institutional knowledge. He leads a team of, I think it's probably about 1,300 folks there at LAX and Van Nuys. And he's held lots of different positions and jobs throughout the organization. So he has a wealth of knowledge. Rick and I started working together about 10 years ago. And have, kind of worked together and kept in touch, and they've been going through a really great journey, and his leadership has been key to progress that's been made there at LAWA. So Rick, I'll turn it over to you to share a few words. I don't know if you had slides, but share some wisdom with us. And you're on mute.
Thanks, Jennifer. I do not have any slides. I'm trying to do my best to avoid death by PowerPoint. So I'm trying to stick to my own words.
Perfect.
Yes, the journey at LAWA is an interesting, complicated, little bit of a soap opera in a way. The journey started approximately 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, where we started an implementation under a previous deputy executive director. And the initial implementation of Maximo went south very quickly. And one of the reasons is that the team that was performing the implementation, which is very talented, however, they did not completely understand what my goal was, what my needs were, and what the users of Maximo's needs were and expectations were. So it became sort of a jam down where we know better and we will tell you what to think and what you should do. And that met with a considerable amount of resistance. And so the people who are actually implementing this work, this program on the part of LAWA, they were floundering. And so a lot of time, effort, energy, and money was lost. And the program was on the rocks. And it was about ready to be canceled because there was no deliverables that were tangible. And it was expensive. And the money was needed elsewhere for our capital program. So the program, I was informed the program was going to come to an end. And that would leave pretty much this division with nothing to work with. We did have a maintenance management system called MainSaver, but when Maximo came to life here at the airport, MainSaver was no longer supported, and any of the updates and care and feeding of MainSaver was canceled. So we had nothing. We were literally having the shops work off Excel spreadsheets and Outlook to do their maintenance work. So cutting to the chase, I was able to convince the CEO and the CFO that we needed an asset management program, not just an airport maintenance management system, but an asset management program. And fortunately for LAWA, the CEO and the CFO at the time agreed that that was something we needed to do. However, they wanted to be ensured that this money would not be squandered and there would be something that would be usable at the end of the day. And so I made that commitment to them. And we brought in a new team, including Jennifer. And we sat down and we learned the mistakes that had been made previously and learned what we needed to do moving forward to ensure those mistakes were not repeated and that we achieved the buy-in from the staff that we needed in order to make this program successful. So my biggest takeaway from this whole exercise is the program needs a champion. It can't be delegated down to shop level or mid-level manager level. It needs to be championed at the highest level within the organization. There needs to be a profound sense of ownership within that executive. I think there needs to be an accountability, not only with the executive, but also with the direct reports who are tasked with implementing this program and ensuring that the program is successful. And you also have to spend an awful lot of time convincing the shop supervisors and staff that after they've done all this work, all this labor, all this effort, that there's something in it for them. Otherwise, they just don't see it because they won't realize the benefits of an asset management program for years. It takes that long in order for the system to mature. And that's a tough load to pull. Because the shop supervisors, at least in this organization, are very, very busy. Not only did they have an existing airport to maintain, but we were bringing on, spending a little over 200 million a month on capital improvement program at the time. And so they were very, very busy, not only maintaining what they had, but also absorbing and onboarding the new equipment. So one of the items that I think really helped lift the veil or the curtain for many of the supervisors is when we started onboarding assets. When we required the contractor to provide us with the nameplate info, and we were able to, via the Maximo team and the consultants, develop a facilities maintenance program, management program at LAWA, and show the shops that, okay, now you're going to know exactly what you own. You're going to know its birth date. You're going to know its blood type. You're going to know its genealogy, and you're going to know everything you need to know about it. And so we can plan for the predictive replacement of that item and the cost. And we were able to project that cost out from the useful life of the asset. And so we now were able to show the shop supervisors, okay, this asset costs $500,000 today, but 20 years from now, when it has to be replaced, it's going to be $4 million with just inflation and all the enabling work necessary in order to change that asset. So it started to lift. It started to lift, and we got more and more buy-in from some of the shop supervisors. Now, it also required a pretty heavy hand from somebody on this panel to ensure that the people did take care of their knitting and paid attention and understood that at the manager level, that they were held accountable to do all they could to ensure that this program was successful, and that the shops understood it was successful, and they didn't just beat people over the head with it, but they actually sat down and encouraged them and sold the program, educated the shops supervisors and the mid-level managers on how important this was to LAWA long-term. So that's my long roundabout way. Here we are with an asset management program at LAWA. We have just completed phase one, our CIP, Capital Improvement Program 1, for a little over 14 billion. We're just starting out on CIP 2, which is another $13 billion. And we have completed we're starting our third version of our asset renewal program, where we looked at the existing assets and did a 5 and a 10-year look ahead and projected what would need to be replaced in what year and what would that cost be. And currently we have a 10-year program with a little over $500 million identified to be spent over that 10-year program. And I want to tell you, when that report was dropped on the CFO's and the CEO's desk, they pretty much had a heart attack, a virtual heart attack, when they saw that all this money had been spent on new, but there was still this huge lift on the existing. And it took a little bit of convincing for them to understand that we have to do more than just build shiny things. We have an obligation as managers to maximize the useful life of the equipment and to ensure that the workers, the people who work on that equipment, they're not completely reactionary. We want to be as proactive as we possibly can. and let the shops, the workers, the actual people who are doing the physical work, that we care. That it's not just a bullwhip and a cattle prod approach, is we want to make sure they have the staff resources that they need to be successful. And that's not easy to do, and it requires consistency and sometimes some careful thought. But at least at Lawa, it seems to have worked. We started out with the crawl, walk, run phase. We're not crawling, we're walking. We've fallen down a couple of times, but we get back up and we're doing a little bit better every year. COVID really was a kick in the stomach to us. We lost a lot of institutional knowledge. We lost a tremendous amount of revenue. And so we've had to not necessarily pause, but we've had a downshift our progress. However, we seem to be able to obtain the resources we need to accelerate our program. So I think we're in a pretty good shape considering where we were in 2020. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. That's an excellent overview and real great insights. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is like the culture change that needs to happen, and culture change doesn't happen within an organization, let alone an organization as complex as LAWA, unless there is that champion. So yeah, those are really good insights and something cool. I mean, Rick kind of just skimmed over it, but what they're able to do now at LAWA is they can use their Maximo system to start to do these 5 and 10-year projections on renewal of existing infrastructure to layer into the CIP. So that sounds like such a simple thing, but it's not. And they're doing it now. It's part of their rigor that they perform. And that's major. I mean, they have data to tell the story. It's not just people saying, we know the infrastructure is crumbling. They have the data that support it. And that's a huge undertaking there at LAWA. So hats off to you. And then the other piece of it is Rick talked a lot about maintenance. And, I know sometimes, maintenance is talked about, like maintenance and asset management, kind of the same thing. And we all know that maintenance is just one component of a broader asset management program, but it's such a critical component because if you don't have the maintenance folks on board, they're the ones that are touching the equipment and collecting the data that's ultimately used for these CIPs. So that buy-in and that what's in it for me and, telling the story is so key. And so it took a while at LAX, but they're doing it. So congratulations, Rick, and thanks for sharing that. So our last panelist, and then I think we'll open it up, is Michael Wood. So Mike, if you can turn on your camera. Mike is with the Allegheny, I always get this wrong, County Airport Authority. I always just say PIT. He works at the Pittsburgh International Airport, but he is with ACAA as the asset manager there. And Mike's I think you've been there since about 2018. You've been active with asset management since about 2020 or so?
Yeah, it's always been a part of all of my previous roles too, in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, recently taking on this role to spearhead this program.
Yeah, and Mike is a process engineer, so he has like great skills and experiences that lend themselves right into some real important asset management elements. So Mike, why don't you sort of take it away and sort of share some of your insights around ACAA?
Awesome. Yeah, now that Richard made me feel self-conscious about having a PowerPoint.
Don't feel bad.
So my name is Michael Wood. I'm the manager of facility assets here at Pittsburgh International Airport. And this is a program that actually started 10 years prior to me ever coming into ACAA. And it paused right around 2018 because they were just not able to gain a lot of traction. And I was hearing Richard talk, and I can echo a lot of the things that he mentioned about their issues early on. So we've actually started a $1.6 billion terminal modernization project, and that's actually what you see on that main screen there. And that project is what reignited the discussions about asset management and relaunched this program. They felt that their goal for $5.6 million in annual cost savings was achievable by deploying an asset management program. So we're going to be playing a major role in the justification of that project moving on. Right now, we have about 6 million square feet of building space, just under 6,000 managed legacy assets. That number is going to grow considerably over the next year as we start to onboard all of those new assets for the TMP. And we really set out to create a customer-focused asset management program in order to help facilitate future 20-year financial forecasts for capital projects. We've gone through all of our engineering maintenance plans, and we've tried to re-engineer them for all of the benefits that we have with efficiency, including the improvement of staff morale and the value from the work assignments that they receive on a daily basis. That 10-year period that we tried to launch asset management really struggled to make tangible progress in operational improvements. There were a couple key failure points that I think that I was able to see after the fact, and it was led by a premature and overly detailed focus on achieving an ISO standard. And when you're starting from scratch, trying to look at ISO standards is just extremely premature, and you get in over your head pretty quickly. That gave them a little bit of tunnel vision where they weren't able to go after some low-hanging fruit to gain momentum and to garnish some of the buy-in from leadership and from frontline trades personnel. And that really created a lot of issues with some of the other smaller projects that they were trying to get rolled out. We had an extremely hard time understanding the CMMS capabilities that we had. We use JD Edwards right now for all of our maintenance management. And we had one part-time contractor who was considered an SME. And in an airport our size, trying to lean on JD Edwards the way we were, that's just not going to happen. You're not going to be successful having one person be the go-to for everything whenever you have hundreds of users trying to generate data for your program. We had a very siloed department layout. Departments in finance weren't communicating with departments in maintenance, and that really prevented us from knowing the why of the business objectives that we were trying to pursue. And that resulted in a lot of process shortfalls. So we had gaps that were the result of not knowing what we were supposed to be collecting data for, why we were supposed to be collecting data, why a process was supposed to be followed. And a lot of the decisions at that time really had to go all the way up to, senior vice president level. And some things in asset management should not have to go that high in your org chart. We shouldn't have to tell you why having on-hand inventory accuracy is an important part of running a maintenance shop. So those are the types of things that we needed to grow beyond back in 2018. So for this program, we really tried to focus on continuum progressive advancement and integrating it into our daily operations. So what I would consider phase one was around the 2018-2020 timeline, where we really set out to just establish a footing. We had no asset portfolio. We had assets in JD Edwards, but we didn't know what we owned. And whenever I finally did extract that list, it was 15,000 assets that had a majority of them been since replaced over the years. None of our capital projects that were brought in included an asset portfolio handover from the contractor. So we were really behind in understanding what we had, what services they were supposed to provide, and who they were supposed to be providing that service to. None of our staff were seasoned in the use of our CMMS. We weren't able to generate work orders efficiently. Every one of our supervisors had stacks of open work orders on their desk with no rhyme or reason about when and how we should go about completing those maintenance tasks. So we set out to fix all that. The team at Jacobs came in, and we set out to create a commitment letter from our COO all the way down to make sure that everybody was on board with those business objectives that we were trying to put into play. We created a SAMP that included 8 business objectives specifically for asset management, included a high-level KPIs. We developed an asset information strategy guide that we handed over to our business intelligence team to kind of lay out, hey, here's the tools that we need to operate a successful asset management program. And we started to do all of these foundational steps to create this program that we're standing on today in order to give people a direction of where we wanted to go. We also rolled out a basic lineup of metric reports just to get an idea of what our baseline performance was today. I use that baseline result in a lot of the presentations that I give to upper management now to show how far we've come and what those opportunity costs would have been if we wouldn't have gone down this path for asset management. 2020 up until now, I would consider this like we're actually building the program. We've audited that asset list from 15,000 all the way down to about 6,000 assets. So that was the amount of equipment that we no longer had on site. We didn't know where it was at. Whenever it was onboarded, none of the details were collected. So we had really limited amount of visibility to things. We are performing annual preventative maintenance programs reviews to make sure that what we're doing right now in terms of preventative maintenance is focused on what matters today and not what was mattering 20 years ago. We addressed process gaps like defining an asset onboarding process, defining how do we decommission an asset, and just trying to make sure that we live every single day by reinforcing the spirit of this program and what it means to have an asset management program at Pittsburgh International. What really helped us was the completion of 2 asset management plans last year and the year before. When we talked about levels of service and identifying stakeholders and prioritizing stakeholders and defining what they expect whenever they come to our airport, and talking about asset risk and the criticality and the consequence of failures and all those very basic buzzwords that we talk about, it started to change the way our upper leadership viewed asset management. For years, we had this very negative connotation of, non-valued added meetings and talking in circles. And anytime anybody ever heard asset management, they kind of like got a little bit down knowing that it wasn't going to end up with any sort of progress. So when we went through those amps, we started seeing, the lights turn on about how much opportunity we had starting this program now before the TMP started and moving into a better future whenever we influx all of those assets. Here's one slide that I always try to include some sort of motivational something in my steering committee meetings. And this is one that I feel is really related to the development of those amps. So when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So when we did that amp and we talked about levels of service, we stopped looking at those pieces of equipment like pumps or air conditioners, but rather how they impacted the customer in the environment that we have and how a failure of one of those pieces of equipment could impact that experience, which then you're able to tie back to non-aeronautical revenue and really put a dollar value on every one of those piece of equipment failures. Here's our objectives, kind of compressed down. So improve safety and compliance, reduce annual operating and maintenance costs, optimize capital investments, reduce emergency funding, prevent run-till failure and critical asset outages, and increase workforce training and efficiency. So everything that we're doing right now in asset management, be it employee training, following up on KPIs, improvement roadmaps, are all geared to go after those objectives. And anytime we ever get any sort of pushback or why are we doing this or anything, we revert right back to these objectives and that commitment letter and remind people that, just as Richard said, this might not be something that we achieve a benefit for today or for tomorrow, but we're trying to plan, 5-10 years out and being able to stand on all of that data to provide a direction for our business decisions. Last 2 slides. So this is a graph that identifies how much work we're completing today versus where we were at in 2018. So this identifies work order completed by year along with the work order hours. So we're completing significantly more work order hours on paper, uploaded into JD Edwards for us to do, asset life cycle cost analysis against versus 2018 with the same amount of people. So we're able to prove that our people are able to do more work today, knowing what they're working on, knowing where to go versus what they did in 2018, getting these very arbitrary work orders. These 2 graphs on the left-hand side, that's a report of our employee utilization. So if we pay an employee for 8 hours a day, we expect to have 7 hours on a work order. In 2018, it was not uncommon where we would have an employee getting paid 168 hours a month, but only showing 10 or 20 hours worth of work on a work order. That is a major gap that needed to be overcome. So we did root cause analysis, 5 whys, all of the typical industrial engineering, exercises, and figured out why. And now every one of our trade groups is pretty much at goal to say we have documented every work assignment that we've done for today. Now we can do asset management and collect some asset data. On the left or on the right, The stationary engineers handle all of our HVAC. We've pushed in that trade harder than any other trade. And since 2019, we have inverted the type of work order we do. So instead of doing 95% reactive, 5% PMs, that is inverted to the majority of our work orders are preventative maintenance work orders versus the reactive work orders. And whenever you invert that, that indicates that we're now doing work assignments that are planned, expected. We can potentially one day move into PM kitting. And then all of the reactive work orders that if something fails, it's going to be on a Saturday at 1 a.m. Those are minimized, and we're able to increase the amount of uptime each one of those assets have. Then lastly, recently, we've rolled out a 3-year outlook schedule for asset management. This is something our leadership team was really pumped to see. We're trying to focus on not just today, tomorrow, but 3 years out, which by then the TMP will have date of beneficial occupancy. We will have a traditional basic program, and we'll be able to be in a really good position to talk about predictive analytics and all the other more running level asset management activities. Thanks, Jen. That's all I had.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I love listening to you and Rick and sort of knowing your journeys and just kind of like seeing it all packaged up with a bow on it. It's and I love your motivational slides always when you share those, but that's a really good story. I appreciate you taking the time to share. I'm curious, and then Mike, I know there's questions. I'll turn it over to you to facilitate some in the chat, but I did hear you, Mike, mention, you said, you know, the AMPs, the asset management plans was sort of this kind of like turning point, or where, you know, light bulbs started to kind of come on for people, starting to see how this was sort of a meaningful program and did bring value. And Rick mentioned the 5 and 10-year forecast, these reports that he started to produce and say, this needs to be, you know, considered when we're developing our CIP. I'm just curious, you know, there are so many elements to asset management, and both you, Rick, and Bryan touched upon all of those. Is there like one big thing beyond the AMP or beyond those forecasts that you guys feel was a game changer? Like you know, you mentioned the commitment letter. I don't know how important that was, or I'm just curious if there, you know, because it is about culture change, right? We keep talking about how do you change a culture. I'm just curious from any of the panelists, Bryan or Rick or Mike, was there like one big thing that you're like, oh, this was so key to really getting people on board with the program?
Yeah, I can go first. So we have a moving walkway that leads all of our parked passengers to our landside terminal. And this past summer was unbearably hot in Pittsburgh. And we have air conditioners in there that were failing nonstop. And whenever it came time to justify for their replacements, which is a very new concept here, we typically run things until they're disintegrated. We had no asset data for them. So all of the work that we had been dumping into those pieces of equipment weren't showing up on any sort of you know, extraction from JD Edwards. And when you try to justify replacement based on your employees telling you, hey, these things are taking a lot of parts and labor, that's very different than walking in with a report and sending it on somebody's desk.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. It sounds like that was kind of what Rick was doing with, you know, all the replacements for some of the infrastructure. That's a good example. Rick?
Well, one that comes to mind that I think was more important to the managers than it was to me, which is refreshing, is they develop performance standards, not only for the asset itself, time in service, mean time between failure, et cetera, but also for the staff. Much of our equipment is assigned to a mechanic. A mechanic is responsible for the care and feeding of that equipment, whether it's HVAC or a conveyance or electrical system within a facility. That way we have accountability. We know who's maintaining that equipment, who's not maintaining that equipment. And if there's a problem with that equipment, we know who to go to ask questions and hopefully get answers. So the managers like the performance standards on the asset. That was a goal that they could work. And then the mechanics, quite frankly, they like the goal of being able to meet their KPI standard on PMs performed. And we've learned, Jennifer, I think, has an inkling of this. Initially, when the preventive maintenance plan was developed, a number of hours was just taken out of the air that seemed reasonable to perform that particular PM. And as time has gone by, we realized that many of those PMs had an extraordinary amount of excess time assigned to them. It wasn't really a 4-hour PM. It was a 2.5-hour PM or a 2-hour PM. And a lot of that we learned from the mechanics, because the mechanics would say, I'm finished with this stack of PMs and I need something to do. And so the feedback was working both ways. And so that was very, very, very helpful. We have, to Mike's point earlier about efficiency of the staff, we lost approximately 25% of our HVAC mechanics due to COVID. People retired, they moved on. Due to budget cuts, we lost staff. But our efficiency has not diminished to that 20% level with the staff reduction. We are still maintaining more equipment, more assets than we had prior to 2020. So I think that's one of the best examples of a win that I can just explain today.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. And yeah, I think Rick and his team have similar like graphs and charts that you were sharing, Mike. And one that sticks out to me for LAWA was your overtime reduction, right? Because just like as your preventive maintenance went up and as you guys really started to like look ahead and schedule work and try to reduce, you started to see overhead sort of click down in some of these spaces. And so that was another really kind of cool metric that was something very quantifiable.
Right. Another thing that helps also is we have we developed years ago a construction design handbook that we use to inform the capital program on what systems and type of equipment they should use as part of the specification. For instance, we'll identify 3 air handling units that we have good experience with. And we will require the project to install one of those 3 air handling units. Or if they want to take exception, submit that exception to FMD for review and concurrence. But what that has done over the years is we've been able to demonstrate that the cost of maintenance is reduced if you put in a good quality piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And you have a proper activation, commissioning, and training program. If you have all that together, your total cost of ownership is going to go through the floor relative to other methods.
Right. And the LAWA Design and Construction Handbook, I think is what it's called. Like it's out there, right? So if you guys Google, LAWA Design and Construction Handbook, you'll see what this handbook is. And not only do they get into specifications, but they start to talk about what data needs to be turned over, so it can be fed into their asset management program, which happens to be Maximo. So Bryan, something cool that I think is happening at Denver is you had Phil who set the vision, and that's really critical, but then there needs to be leadership at all levels. So I know you are kind of right there behind Phil saying, okay, I'm going to help you execute this vision and strategy. I know you're fairly new to Den, but anything that you want to share from a leadership standpoint that you see starting to really work there at Denver International?
Yeah, so one of the first things I did when I came here was actually establish an asset management program team that all of those different business units that play a role in asset management, I now have a representative from each of them, and we meet roughly every 4 to 6 weeks, say, here are some of the things that are going on. Here are the things that we would like your input on, such as the weightings for the consequence of failure factors, things like that. So they understand why we're making decisions and can have a role in it as well. It helps get them to buy in, and it helps them say, hey, they are listening to us and we are doing this right. And now I can start seeing my role. So I'm trying to get the others involved, which I think is really critical, and letting them know it's like, I'm just not trying to regurgitate what we're doing. It's like, hey, give us your input. We want to take it. We want to hear it and really listen to you so it can be working for everybody. So I think that was critical. And obviously, as you saw, support from Phil on down across the board.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I think, I think some airports are doing something very similar. And I like the note that Mike, I think you put there in the chat too, about it's not just always about that return on investment. Like we're spending this much and we're saving that much, but just overall morale of employees, feeling like they're working in a high performance workplace, right? Like feeling good about the tools and the technology and the process and all that. That's one of those, it's harder to quantify, but it's just as important, that sort of job satisfaction. So that's a really great one. So great discussion. Thank you guys, provided like a really good perspective of some of the leadership challenges, as well as like tactics that you're using to continue to move the dial on changing the culture. I know there's quite a few. Do we want to go over those?
Sorry, Jen, that was me.
thank
I was
you.
trying to minimize
Oh,
that.
that was you?
Yeah, I accidentally hit the button. I don't know why they would put it there.
Yeah, it's funny. Do you want to go over the questions in the chat though, or before we
Yeah, well,
adjourn?
first of all, I want to concur that this has just been a spectacular set of comments from all of the speakers. And thank you, Jennifer, for guiding the discussion. And we've got more questions than we can answer in the next 5 minutes. So what we'll do is go into what we call overtime, and the panelists who can stick around and the attendees who can stick around, please feel free to do that. Let's see, Mike's been doing a good job of answering questions about that are coming in through the chat. But let me ask Rick specifically if there's any measurements of value that you think are, come to hand, not that you need to put up a PowerPoint slide for it, but there was questions about specifics, measurable values.
Nothing that I would want to publish. Previous experience with KPIs, publishing KPIs, that's a double-edged sword. And I've learned, at least in our culture here at LAWA, that financial projections of cost savings are often received by a very skeptical audience, and they want to see your homework and all your data, and that just snowballs into a never-ending program. So I've sort of taken the philosophy here that if we're doing our job properly, nobody knows we're here. The trade-off of that is nobody knows we're here. But we've been able to demonstrate at our budget, we're entering budget season right now. That's why I'm a little distracted here. That we've been able to work with a flat budget for 3 years. And rather than put out reports or KPIs that demonstrate how well we're doing, I let our budget speak for itself. And so we've had a flat budget since 2020. And as I mentioned earlier, we've onboarded thousands, literally thousands of assets. And yet we've been able to maintain those assets per our PM program with reduced staff and a flat budget. So to me, that is the message we send to those who care to know.
Excellent.
And that's primarily my boss and the CFO.
And your flat budget leads to one of the questions about the impact of COVID. And I don't think that that's really the question. Everybody knows that flights went down during COVID. It's how you've been responding. And if you're increasing passengers from 2020, but keeping a flat budget, that's a great way of indicating success.
Actually, it's a little bit better than that. We did all this with an approximate across the board 20% reduction in staff. That's throughout the entire organization, FMD, and an initial 20% budget reduction in fiscal year 21-22. So we've been flat for 3 years.
That's down so low, you don't know what up looks like anymore. That's that's incredible. Bryan, I don't know if you have any numbers about that, but then there's also questions about Denver. So do you want to relate to the COVID first?
Yeah, so for COVID, we recovered in 2021, we were still a little down. In 2022, we surpassed where we were in 2019, pre-COVID. And of course, obviously this year we're blowing through that. So And with that has come a lot of different challenges of maintaining things that had not been maintained in 25 years. And so we're trying to do a lot of catch up on things that had not been maintained properly. And everything used to be run to failure. And now we're trying to change that whole dynamic to there are things we need to maintain and put programs in place and things like that. And COVID or resurgence after COVID is really showing the need for that.
Excellent. Some very consistent themes about being able to do more with less, and also instituting a maintenance registry and awareness that wasn't there before. So that's good. Renuka has a question regarding the asset assessments at Denver. Is it purely a physical visual assessment, or do you use thermal imaging, noise, vibration analysis, etc., to assess equipment conditions?
We do use all of that. We do have a condition assessment program in place where we're redoing everything every 5 years. But then we also have the thermal imaging and the vibration analysis for the mechanical components and the thermal imaging for the electrical as well. So we do have all of that in place. Maintenance really handles the thermal imaging, and then the asset management group handles the overall facility condition assessments.
So Renuka has a number of other questions that get into the management of the assets, and we want to be talking about the asset leadership. So it's very easy to want to quickly get into how does you make sure the elevator keeps working. Our elevators always break down, but that's not it. It's about the system of systems. And Michael, since you're a process engineer, perhaps you might be able to address the question from Obaid about was any incentive program instituted for the staff in Pittsburgh to help create that success you outlined?
No, but I am a fan of incentive programs. I think the best way to motivate somebody is to give them extra money for hitting a goal or completing a certain task. But no, we did not use any sort of financial incentive. But whenever you have a staff of mostly people that have worked here their entire careers, you get a lot of very strong opinions. And when you get those legacy frontline staffers walking up to you saying, the culture is different than it was 10 years ago, it's better this way. A lot of those issues that we had with coming in and getting 2 hours worth of work, or we're sick of fixing this one piece of equipment, we can see that you guys are addressing that now. That means a lot. And whenever they're telling you that, it's a good indication that the quality of a day's work for a frontline employee is going up, and that probably means quite a bit to people.
Renuka, I hope that addresses the series of questions you had there. And Michael, Carmen wants to know if inverting your work outcomes from reactive to predictive took 5 years. Before you answer that, I just want to comment on the fact that all of you talked about that this is a journey. This is not a quarterly, something you're going to do this quarter and then move on. I really like that.
Yeah, it looking at the data, it did take that long. I think if we took the mindset of the people leading those departments from today back to 2018, it would have been considerably shorter. The hardest thing about this, I think, is just getting movement, getting momentum. As we continue to grow and we get better at documenting our work, I'll be really curious to see how well the other trades pick up on inverting that the same way. But yeah, it did take a while, and looking back, it doesn't feel like it took that long, but there was a lot of challenges related to getting folks to do the basics. And I think once we got the basics down, then it really kicked off.
And that's probably, I know Mike's people are starting to drop off. Born, I don't know, on the thing that might be a good place to sort of wrap it up. And yeah, I really appreciate all the panelists' times. I know you're probably kind of headed off to other meetings and commitments, and I know it's not always easy to find an hour block to participate and share your knowledge, but such great knowledge that you guys have shared. I know there's some questions we didn't get to, and hopefully those are things that can be addressed maybe offline.
Yes, and actually it's a good time to bring in Nick, who is our Director of Technology, and we've set up an ALN Airport Asset Leadership Board page, and we will post some of the questions and answers there so that people can get to them. There's been a couple of people with specific comments that we'll reach out to. And Michael and Bryan, I'm hoping that you're fine with us sharing the slides.
Sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you all, Richard, Michael, Bryan, and Jennifer for facilitating. This has been great. So Nick, why don't you wrap us up?
Okay, thank you all, panelists and viewers, for sticking with us this long. And a big thank you to Phillip A. Washington for getting us going today. Again, big thank you to the panelists and all our organizational members, especially our Platinum organizational member, Onuma System, and our patron members, Definitive Logic, ABS, and CGI, and Jacobs. And again, if you're out there thinking you'd like to work with us, please reach out, because we would love to partner with every organization in the world. And if not, then set up some boards for that industry so you can talk to people who get what you're saying, get what you're feeling. And then a note about upcoming events: we will have a follow-up program for this ALN Airport Asset Leadership Board. And if you're interested in participating, please send an email to info@assetleadership.net.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nick and Mike, and then all the panelists. Really appreciate your insights and look forward to getting this team back together in a couple months' time, where the focus will be digital transformation and the art of the possible. So hopefully this board is one that will continue to gain momentum. We'll be coming together virtually every couple months to sort of share best practices, leadership tips and tools, and those type of things. So this is the first of many sessions. So appreciate everybody's time and willingness to share. And for the ALN guys for hosting, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Sure
Okay.
thing.
guys.
Take care all.
Okay, take care. Bye.